Craig, thank you for being here for the first ever Final Four talks as the executive director of the NABC. Obviously, you represent the largest professional association with 5,000 plus coaches. You're talking of guardians of the game and instilling these foundational values in people, which I think is tremendous. But from your life, right, who were those early coaches or the ones that set foundational values for you?
Yeah, well, Nilay, first of all, let me thank you and the NCAA for having me on. I think this is a terrific idea, and I'm really looking forward to participating in this program. And, you know, when I look back at who my foundational coaches were, you know, I have to start with my parents.
Sure.
Right? So they were my first coaches. And I think they're everyone's first coaches, even though you don't necessarily look at your parents as coaches. But I would have to say that they were the first ones there who instilled sort of our family values,
Sure.
our family game plan, for lack of a better term. And, you know, they were the ones who got us, my sister and I, started on the path to where we ended up doing some really cool things.
Such an understatement, some really cool things, but yes, indeed. So what was it like, you know, south side of Chicago? I know your dad worked a lot as well. So what was that like for you growing up, having that presence of him and your mom?
You know, so, and it's been written about a lot, so forgive me if you've heard this, but my mom was a stay-at-home mom.
Right.
They called them homemakers or housewives back then.
Yeah.
You know, if I ever said that to my wife now, she'd get up and walk out of the door. And my dad worked for the city of Chicago.
Right.
So he was what was called a stationary fireman.
Yeah.
But it was a typical blue-collar job at the water department. So he went to work in a uniform, which happened to be blue. So, and he was disabled, and we called it handicapped back then. But he was disabled. He had MS, and from my earliest memories of my dad, he always walked with a limp, and it got progressively worse over the years.
Yeah.
But having said that, it did not stop him from being the dad that I wanted to model my parenting after. He got up and went to work every day, never complained, was at all of our events.
Wow.
He would come home, and he worked a swing shift. So he worked 6 days on days, 6 days on afternoons, and 6 days on nights. And on the days where he worked and he got home at a regular time, we'd be outside playing.
Yeah.
Or if he worked nights, he would stay up till we went to school. So, I mean, he was always around.
That's not typical, especially in those times with especially fathers just being so focused on work and moms raising the kids.
You know, you're right about that, Nilay. And boy, I look back and in some ways it feels like it was so long ago in the ways we used to do things. But, you know, he wasn't the kind of guy who you know, went to work, had banker's hours, and then had to work at night.
Yeah.
You know, we always sort of had to figure out what shift he was on, and then that dictated what we could do.
Yeah.
But it was always something that we did with him.
Yeah.
You know, he would go up to the park with us and throw the baseball and football around. You know, we'd play running bases out in front of the house. So you're right. It was not typical at that time.
Right.
You know, and even back then there were a lot of single parent folks.
Sure.
But mostly it was folks who were working. They were just trying to make it.
Yeah.
And they had one or two jobs.
Yeah.
So they weren't around not because they didn't want to be around.
Yeah.
They weren't around because they couldn't be around.
Right. Yeah, and I remember similarly, and we've spoken a little bit, you know, I had the same thing with my father traveling, and he would often come home late at night, 12-1, and I should be waiting just for a game of ping pong on the dining table, right?
Yeah.
The small things you look forward to that you still remember all these years later.
Yeah.
So how did your mom complement sort of his absence as well during those times?
You know, my mom she was the sort of everyday hands-on.
Yeah.
And even though my dad was a man, my mom was the disciplinarian, which happens because you're around all the time.
Yep.
So she sort of made sure we kind of grew up with some discipline, some rules, and stuck to it.
Yeah.
But you know, the house was filled because of both of them, but my mom in particular. The house was filled with unconditional love, a real striving for excellence, but not in a pressured sort of tiger mom way.
Yeah,
You know, my mom was the type of mom who you would come in and do your homework, and she would say, "Did you do your best?" And she would never get on you for not getting an A. She would only get on you for not getting an A when you were capable of getting an A.
Yeah. Was a little bit of the Jedi mind trick, trying to make you think you can do better than you are.
Absolutely. You know, she had the Jedi mind trick before Star Wars, because you know you're laughing, but you use the exact right term, because she would back you into excellence.
Yeah.
Without the pressure. And so I found myself always trying to figure out if I could get myself to a higher level.
Yeah.
But I wasn't feeling the pressure from her. I was feeling the pressure from myself.
Yeah.
That, now that I think back on it, could have been some kind of child abuse or something, huh?
But
I'm glad she did it.
Yeah, no, of course. I like the backing you into excellence, because in some ways, it seems that's also the hallmark of great coaches, right?
Absolutely, Nilay. And you know, I know we're going to talk about this some later, but a lot of my coaching chops, I will say, and my techniques, strategies come from parenting and come from coaches who I've had in the past, but particularly my parents who were my first coaches.
Sure. Now, you mentioned your mom being the disciplinarian. Did she treat you and your sister the same, differently?
You know, she did not. And that is not a negative thing, and I'll tell you why. And you understand this, because, as you said, we've talked and we've talked about our backgrounds. And you know, I was born in 1962. My sister was born in 1964. So we came up during what was still sort of a civil rights, highly aware civil rights time, where young black men had to be careful when they were out in the world by themselves.
Yeah.
So my parents raised me differently than they raised my sister. They raised me to survive that world as a black man, and they raised her to be an independent, strong black woman. So our paths to where we got to in the same house were different, based on again on the need to be very careful about how your son grows up in the world and what he can say and what he can do.
Yeah, you mentioned a line to me earlier that just bothered me at the very core, and you said your mom raised your sister to be that independent, fierce, successful woman, and she raised you not to get lynched.
Right. She raised me not to get lynched, and she used to say that. She's like, you can't go out here and act a fool, because young black men will get killed doing that.
Yeah.
And you know, I did not feel real pressure on that at the time, like I do now as a father raising boys. But because when I was younger, you feel like, oh yeah, well, I just will do what my parents say. I won't get in any trouble. But you don't realize how that kind of socialization affects your psyche. It affects your self-confidence, and it affects your ability to thrive in a world that's supposed to be a meritocracy. No, and I hope, with more initiatives, with what you're doing with the NABC, with the awakening around the country, that 20 years from now, we shouldn't be thinking of how not to raise our kids in general, right? No, absolutely. And we as an organization, and I've talked to our board, and I've talked to our coaches from all across the country. We want to be leaders in this space. And it's not for any other reason that it's the right thing to do. Absolutely. But we also have to note many of our constituents, our players,
Yeah.
are coming from these same backgrounds.
Right.
And so it's exciting to sort of be able to be in this position as sort of leading a group of leaders to do something that's really good for our game, good for young people, and good for the world.
Yeah. Speaking of sort of these experiences as well, what influenced your parents to treat you the way they did based on their own parents as well?
Yeah, what I really loved about my parents' parenting, and I look back on it now as an adult, as a parent, my parents never, especially my mom, she never said, when we had a question about anything, she never said, because I said so, or this is the way you're going to do it because I'm the adult and you're the kid.
Yeah.
And as I got older, I asked her how that came about. And she said, well, there's a couple of things, and that's probably where I get there's a couple of things, because I'm always thinking of there are many reasons why things happen. And she said, there's a couple of things. She said, first of all, I don't have all the answers.
Sure.
You don't get trained on how to be a parent. So my mom used to say when things made her mad, that her kids did, she'd count to 10 before she'd react. Now, I never knew that because it seemed like we were getting screamed at all the time.
Of course.
And I've tried to do that myself.
Yeah.
That's one. But the other was, she said, well, when I grew up, when I was your age, my parents did some things that I didn't think were the smartest things to do.
Right.
But they did some things that were really insightful. And she said, I just try and take the good things that they did and leave the bad things.
Yeah.
And that is such a remarkably simple strategy.
Easier said than done, though.
It is easier said than done because you are so programmed by your parents.
Yes.
But it is remarkably simple when you think about it, But as you said, it's easier said than done, because far be it from me to think that my parents did anything wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And you look at their generation where it was the do as I say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mentality. So I've been very fortunate to have the parents I've had and have. My mom is still with us, and I talk to her weekly, you know, if not more.
Yeah. I know your grandparents, and you mentioned your grandfather's influence too, with things that went beyond academia, but life lessons, learning words, something as simple as that.
Yeah. So my paternal grandfather, my father's father, was a real curmudgeon, put it that way, to be nice for the audience. He was a real curmudgeon, but he was, and that was to his own kids.
Yeah.
But to his grandkids, he was softer.
Yeah.
And once again, as you find out when you get older, that's what happens. Like my mom treats my kids like, they can walk all over the couch, and we had the couch.
You could never get away with it. Yeah.
So, but what he used to do, which irritated me at the time, but I found myself doing it with my teams, was that anytime he'd use a word, we'd have a discussion. He'd try and use a word that we don't know, like gratuitous is a word that I remember from being a kid. And he said, you know what gratuitous means? And we would say no. And he would say, look it up. And he had this big, gigantic dictionary in the living room. I mean, it was one of those big ones that you see at the library. It's always open.
Yeah.
And
I thought they were only in libraries, by the way.
No, he had one. Yeah. He had one. And the house was maybe, 120 square feet, but he had this gigantic dictionary in there. And you'd open the dictionary up and you get to the G, and it had the little tiny writing, and he would make you use it in a sentence.
Yeah.
And he did that. If he did it once, he did it 75 times. But that was his way of imparting the fact that you shouldn't look at education and knowledge and intellect as a negative.
Yeah.
And that's what he was worried, that anytime we used the improper language, he would correct us. And it was irritating at the time, but
Yeah.
I'm so glad
Yeah.
I did it. And you know, you and I talked about this. When I was coaching, I put a dictionary and a thesaurus in the locker room for my players so that whenever
Yep.
I could
Yep.
use a word that I knew they wouldn't know, and then I'd ask them. And every now and then you get a player who'd try and say the definition of the word, and we'd make a little bet if he was
Get it
right or
right?
not.
Yeah.
But they always had to go look it up.
If I ask your players, how many of them would say you are a curmudgeon? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I would say there's probably a small, like 15% would say I was a curmudgeon.
And your kids?
My kids would not say that I'm a curmudgeon. I have been able to trick them into thinking that I'm somewhat cool. But my mom and my sister, when I was coaching, they thought I was the meanest person on the planet Earth.
But that's moms too, man. No matter what it is, moms will find something to say. Can you do this better?
Well, it's amazing too, because moms are the ones who discipline you, and then when they see you disciplining your children or your players, it's way over the top.
Yeah. It's the same thing you said with grandkids. So I got an 8-year-old boy and a girl who's 3 going on 23, right? And my mom, back to the grandparents thing, I could not get away with anything that they can get away with now. And if I discipline them, she'll actually tell me, not them, right? I was like, Mom, you would have probably slapped me at the time back then.
It's great to hear that this is universal.
It's very much so.
Not just
very
my mom.
much so.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a saying in India that translated literally means that the interest is dearer than the principle.
Ooh,
right? And I was like, oh, that's strong.
That's strong.
So
especially for a former finance guy.
There you go, right?
Yeah.
So, but moving from academia, which you were clearly gifted at that age, to also getting into sports as well. Like, how did that contribute to your sense of being and self-esteem and all that?
Well, it was interesting because 35 years, 40 years ago, people didn't. I mean, you wanted to be a baseball player or a football player. But you didn't strive to be that at all. At least not any of my friends and people I went to school with, and certainly not in our household. You were going to school to get an education. And growing up in Chicago on the South Side with I had a couple of aunts and uncles who went to college.
Sure.
So the idea was to go to college. That was your ticket out of your situation, whether it be socioeconomic, whether it's racial, whatever you wanted to, the dreams you wanted to get to, you would achieve that by education.
Right.
So athletics for me and sports for me were outdoor exercise. My parents wanted us to go outside and get some exercise.
Yeah.
It was fun. And it was a form of socialization. That's how we got socialized. I'm sure it was the same for you in India.
Absolutely.
You're just outside, and kids are outside, and you're figuring out what to do. Well, here's a ball. Let's play this. Let's do that.
Yeah.
So there was no extra training for me to become an athlete, an athlete who could play in college.
Sure.
And that I didn't even know that was a possibility until my junior year of high school. So I was just out there trying to exist. And then I got into sort of organized sports, Little League and bitty basketball and things of that nature. And it was, again, still, I mean, we were playing it, but we were just emulating the guys you could see on television. We weren't, it wasn't like at least in my mind, it wasn't an organized, thoughtful way of getting out of my situation.
Yeah, till it actually happened and you went to Princeton.
Yeah, it was amazing. I got recruited by a couple of bigger schools, a couple of smaller schools, but all of a sudden Princeton showed some interest. And Princeton was the only school that I applied to. And I was this close to not going to Princeton, right? So Princeton's the only school, the only Ivy League school, the highest academic school. No offense to the other one. So And remember, neither one of my parents, my mom went to college for a little while, didn't finish. My dad wasn't college educated. And when it was time to decide on where I was going to college, I had visited Princeton, and I had visited a couple other schools. University of Washington was the other school that I was considering. And back then, that was the Pac-8, if you can believe it. Now it's the Pac-12. So I've gone through Pac-8, Pac-10, Pac-12. So I went to visit the University of Washington and had a really nice visit. Visited Princeton, visited a couple other schools. And my dad said, so, what do you think? And we're at our kitchen table now. I lived in a very small apartment. So our kitchen table is like this. You're in my dad's seat. I'm across from him.
Right.
My mom would sit here. My sister would sit here. And this was one day after dinner. And my sister's gone. My mom's doing the dishes. So, literally, the sink is right here.
Yeah.
Like if you're sitting in the chair my mom's in, you could reach back and touch the person who was doing the dishes.
Okay.
And my dad said, so, what do you think? And I said, well, I think I know where I want to go. And I'm going to the University of Washington. And my dad did what dads do when they know you made the wrong decision. So he does this.
Not very subtle at all.
No. And he knows that we know when he does this routine that I'm going to show you, he's disappointed.
Yeah.
And he would do this, and he would look up, and then he put his arms crossed, and he put his chin down to his chest. And I don't want to mess up the mic here, but he would start rubbing his 5 o'clock shadow on his neck. So it was just like a thing he did where we knew he was really contemplating what kind of punishment was coming.
Oh boy.
And I mentioned to you earlier that my dad was disabled.
Yeah.
So when he was disappointed, the whole house was disappointed.
Yeah.
It's like, how could you disappoint this dude who gets up and goes to work? He's got the crutches that go around his arm by now, and he's dragging his legs to work every day. And I was heartbroken.
Yeah.
And he said to me, he's like, calmly said, why did you pick, how did you come to that decision?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the exact words. And I said, well, and I knew to start with the academics. I said, and at the time I was good at math and science, so I thought I was going to be an engineer, which was a big mistake. We can talk about that later. I said, they have a great engineering program.
Yeah.
They're in the Pac-8. And I went out and I played with the guys. And I think by my junior year, I could maybe even see some playing time.
Right.
And then I thought I was going to hit them with this, because what a lot of people don't realize, now people at the NCAA know this, but most people don't know, the Ivy League doesn't give athletic scholarships.
Yeah.
It's all based on need. And so the tuition back then was $13,000. So this was 1979.
Sounds ridiculously
It sounds
cheap
ridiculous,
right now.
right?
Yeah.
And you know what my family contribution was? $2,000, like $2,200. But that might as well have been $2 million to me.
Yeah.
$2,200?
Yeah.
I was like, pfft. And these guys, I'm going for free.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm good. My dad, and so my final reason was, I was like, and it's free. And my dad looked across the table and calmly said, like, my dad didn't gamble or play cards, but if he did, he would have been good, because he said, if you pick your school based on how much I have to pay, I'm going to be disappointed. And it was like, dun, dun. If there was music in the background, it would have been dun, dun, dun. And he said to me, he's like, so this decision is yours, but think about that. And we'll talk about it tomorrow.
Such a loaded question, that whole think about that.
Man, because that meant you could come back with the same answer, but you would have to renegotiate.
Yeah.
And I thought about it.
Yeah.
I thought about it. And so the next night, exact same scene. He said, have you thought about what I said? And I said, yeah, I did. And I said, actually, and I was going to say I liked Princeton better, but I said I liked and when I got the PR out, he's like, fine, you'll go to Princeton. And that's how I ended up at Princeton. Now, I knew it was a better school, and I knew that my parents would have thought it was a better school, but I was looking out for them and almost made, and no offense to the University of Washington. I ended up working in the Pac-12, and I have some very good friends who, one of my really dearest friends, Rebecca Alvey, went to the University of Washington. So there's some great people who've come out of there, and so no offense to them, but going to Princeton ended up changing my life. So that's how I ended up at Princeton University, class of 83. Class of 83, parent of 2018, because my daughter Leslie went there.
That's right. You clearly have imbibed so many of your dad's values, the empathy that you mentioned. You were thinking of your father having to pay for it more than your own desire and all the rest.
Right.
But if I could ask you, knowing what you know now about yourself and your father, is there something that you know he had in him that you wish you had in you?
So yes, and I'm going to talk about yes, there is. My dad was the person in our family, even though his dad was still alive. And his mom, my dad was the person that everybody in our family came to for advice.
Was he the Godfather?
It was like the Godfather, but he was sort of like Sonny. I mean, no. He was sort of like Michael after Michael sort of took over the power.
Got it.
Before the Godfather died.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, it was just, he was sort of, he was the oldest son in his family, and he was older than the people on my mom's side of the family, who he ended up being sort of a counsel to too. So when people, if somebody came to my house and we weren't all in the same room, they were coming to talk to my dad about an issue. And he had this level of patience that I wished I had earlier in my life. I had embraced that because I didn't. And the reason why I didn't, Neil, was because I thought he was being patient because he was disabled and had to be patient. Right? And I'm thinking, well, I'm able-bodied. I gotta be bouncing around. I gotta take care of all this stuff. But that was the trait that I really, and his ability to have people come to him and counsel, the ability to listen, the ability to help people through their issues, which I have embraced. I feel like I've learned that from him. But I would say that, and we didn't talk about this, and I should, because another thing that I learned from my mom and my dad was how to be philanthropic when you don't have a lot of resources, because they were philanthropic with their time, not only with us, but with kids in the neighborhood, with kids at school. My mom was at school all the time, and when she saw that I got through with my work, she said, you should be helping other kids with their work. And so that's where my sort of philanthropic character comes from. And it wasn't just giving money away. So I didn't know that term until I got older.
No, I love that term because I see it going back to you. Two things, right? One, that's something everybody can do. But two, that's a far more valuable gift you can give somebody than money, right? And I think that speaks volumes to the character of them, and then what's passed on to you all as well. Right? So you went from that, and Dad said, Princeton it is, and you got to Princeton. Before you set all those records and became that basketball Ivy League legend and stuff, you actually were close enough to not being at Princeton.
Oh man, let me tell you. So one of the reasons why I was hesitant about going to Princeton was because I was worried that intellectually I wasn't going to be good enough. And it was interesting. The basketball side, Coach Carrill didn't think I was going to be good enough. He was that kind of coach when he recruited you. He would tell you, you're probably not going to play much. You got this wrong, you got that wrong, you can't do this. You probably won't get to play, but I want you on the team because you're a nice kid, like that.
Yeah.
Or, I want you on the team because I like your dad. That was the one thing.
Really?
I never caught it as much as my other teammates because Coach Carrill loved my father. He loved what he stood for. He was a blue-collar worker just like his dad. He was disabled and was able to send a son, disabled and not college educated, and knew the value of sending a kid to Princeton. Little did I know that Coach Carrill did think I was a good player, and I didn't realize that. So he really appreciated that my dad sent me to Princeton and not to somewhere just to play basketball. So my first year at Princeton, and I mentioned to you earlier, I was good in math and science, right, in high school. I was a good student in high school. I was better than a good student, right? But I never studied. And it wasn't out of disrespect for education. It was, I didn't need to study. I could take tests. I was a master test taker. So I could figure out what they were trying to get at, and I could do it just from the homeworks. So I never really studied. Whereas my sister is a studier. She is easily the higher intellect when it comes to studying. She was a straight A student, and she was trying to get straight A's. I was trying to get the right answer enough times so people would leave me alone.
Kids watching this, don't try this at home.
Don't try this at home, because when you get to college, you have to study. And I didn't realize that because I didn't talk to anybody in my household who had gone to college. So I was I was out there. So I ended up taking, and mind you, I'm engineer major. So I'm taking physics, chemistry, calculus, which I didn't have in high school. And then I took economics as like a sort of non-engineering course, the calculus section. Needless to say, Nilay, I got the worst grades I had ever gotten in my entire life midterm. I got a C, 2 Ds, and an F going into the midterm. I'm devastated when I get my report card. So what do? Not hide the report card. First thing I did was I went to find a phone, and this was, ladies and gentlemen and kids out there, there used to be a time when you didn't carry your phone around. So I had to go to a phone booth so I could get some privacy. And a phone booth is one of these big cylindrical buildings where you go in just to make a phone call. And I call collect like I always did. Dad picks up the phone, and I am bawling. I mean, in tears. I mean, the kind of crying. And he's like, what is going on? I know, and he must have thought, the sky was falling. I can't even imagine if my kid called me from college crying. And I was like, I'm in over my head. I can't do it. I knew I shouldn't have come here. I knew I should have gone to the University of Washington, and this is too much. And I'm going on, and my dad is finally like, calm down. Now tell me what's going on. And I tell him about my grades and how bad it is. And he said, now wait a minute. How many people go to that school? Now, I'm bearing my soul to my dad, and he comes with one of those dad questions, and I'm like, this dude didn't even go to college. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And I'm starting to get mad, and I'm like, I don't know, like 4,400. And he said, so that makes it, how many in each class? About 1,100. And I was like, yeah, what's your point? And then I'm getting mad. And he said, well, I know one thing. You're not going to be number one in the class.
Way to build your self-esteem there.
You're not going to be number one in the class. And then he said the thing that saved me. He said, you're not going to be number 1,100 either. And that was one of those things that hits you like a lightning bolt. And I was like, you know what? You're right. And he said, so why don't you figure out how to get yourself some help, go to see a counselor, and you'll be fine. Maybe you shouldn't be an engineer. That's what he said. Maybe you shouldn't be an engineer.
Maybe you shouldn't,
And I was thinking, maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah.
And but it was you're not going to be a number 1100. Yeah. He was like, you've never been last at anything. I know you've been first at some stuff, but you've never been last.
Yeah.
And I was so grateful, but I like, at that time, I was thinking, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And then he hits me with you're not going to be number 1100. And it saved me, because I could have walked right to the bus station, got on a bus and gone back to Chicago, left all my stuff there. That's how I felt.
Yeah. Wisdom, education, right? Yeah. It's not always just
always the same. And here's the guy didn't go to college and smarter than everybody I know.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So you had an outstanding career, but were there times other than that first year where you felt like the imposter syndrome, that I don't belong?
That was the real imposter syndrome moment for me, right? Because up until then, I had no failures.
Yeah, true.
Right? And certainly didn't feel like I didn't belong on the basketball court. And having sports really helped.
Sure.
Right? So that helped. I didn't have another imposter syndrome thought process. The next time was when I got drafted by the 76ers. And like I was telling you before, I didn't go to Princeton to get into the NBA.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that every kid who's playing basketball, irrespective of where he goes, even if he's going to Princeton or if he's going to Amherst Division III or if he's going to a JUCO, everybody wants to be in the NBA.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be in the NBA. Or WNBA.
Yep, exactly.
Thank you. Or WNBA. You want to get to the pinnacle if you can. But that wasn't my goal, right? I was thinking, use this to get into a good college. But after I had a pretty decent career, I ended up getting drafted by the 76ers. Now that's when I had the imposter syndrome, because they had just won the championship. So I graduated in 1983. They had just won the championship. They drafted Leo Routens from Syracuse in the first round and drafted me in the fourth round, and we played the same position. I'm thinking to myself,
jeez. And
you got Dr. J, you got Maurice Cheeks, who I knew from Chicago. So I was like, at least I know Maurice Cheeks. They had that whole championship team, Andrew Toney. So I go to the rookie free agent camp, and I'm out there in the layup line thinking somebody's going to figure out I shouldn't be here. That was the next time I had sort of the imposter syndrome. Now, I ended up actually playing well, made it to the summer league, played well in the summer league, and the summer league happened to be at Princeton at that time.
Nice.
And but I didn't make the team, ended up going overseas to play. But I to get back to the whole imposter thing, even back when I was after I had the freshman year sort of breakdown and almost went home, I talked to my mom, I talked to my dad after that incident, and they both made me realize that as long as you can read, you can learn anything.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
And they were right.
Yep.
And so instead of going into my classes as feeling as if I didn't belong, I just worked harder, got some help, changed some classes around, and then I approached school like I did belong.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great things about being in college. And it doesn't have to be elite. The level of the college doesn't matter. Coming away with accomplishing, going through and getting a degree, whether it's an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's, or a doctorate, you come away with a feeling of intellectual capability.
Yes.
And that does wonders for your self-esteem.
Yeah. And there's so much to be said about the process and the journey, right? It's the hours that no one sees on the basketball court or at the test that get you there. And in fact, one of our other speakers, Patrick Anderson, he's one of the most, if not the absolute most accomplished Paralympian in history.
Yep.
And he's got back-to-back Canadian team, gold, silver, gold in 4 successive Paralympics. And one of the things he mentioned that drove their team's success was this continuous desire to learn and curiosity, right? And I feel like that's such a critical trait, not just in those college years,
Yeah.
but for years to come with a lifelong learning.
Yeah.
That, to your point, if you know to read or have the curiosity, today you have YouTube.
Yeah.
Kids are learning things off there that we never had access to before.
Right. And access instantaneously.
Instantly. Yeah.
It's terrific. And you bring up a really good point. And that's the part of the always reading and always gathering information. And you know, it's allowed me to do some things with my life that I never thought I'd be able to do.
Sure.
But it all comes down to sort of being able to take the time, figure out how things are working, and then insert myself and add value when I can.
Yeah. So you mentioned going overseas. Now, a kid with no money, a house this big, Princeton, 76ers, and UK. What was that like?
You know what that was like, Nilay? It might have been one of the best experiences of my life. And it's hard to say that when I really wanted my best experience to be playing in the NBA.
Right.
After I got sort of a little taste of it with the preseason.
Yeah.
But what happened to me were a few things. So one, I got to experience this different culture, which I never would have done. We were not that kind of family to be able to go traveling abroad.
Sure.
Right? So I got to live in another country, which not many people get to do. They get to visit, but I got to live there. And it made me have a new perspective on the world's view of Americans.
Yeah.
And so again, this is mid 80s. I'm over there and I'm living there. So I'm immersed in the culture. And then you see Americans come to visit who are tourists, and you see the reaction of the native people to the way we are when we come to a new country and we're looking for the Hilton and the McDonald's, right? When you got all this culture around.
Right.
And it made me a better traveler.
Yep.
And it made me a better global citizen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're playing and taking bus rides, and you go from England, you get on the ferry, and the next thing you know, you're in France. And then you go to Belgium, and you take like a 3-hour bus ride, and the culture is like you went to a completely different world.
Absolutely.
Right? So you realize how young and how myopic we are here growing up here. And I mean all Americans. I'm not saying that, I mean all of us, myself included. But really, and to get back to kind of what's at issue nowadays, what I experienced from being a black man in England was not so much, and I will say this, I got treated wonderfully because I was an American and I was a basketball player, right? So I tell the story all the time. I would go over there and they would say, "Oh, you have such a great accent." And I'm like, "I don't have an accent. You have an accent," right? Because even here in the States, people don't even talk about your accent. If you go down south or somebody from down south comes up there and say, "Oh, you're from the South." That's it, But to be able to go somewhere and somebody says, "I have an accent," and I'm like, "No, I don't have an accent." Nila, you have an accent.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was kind of cute and fun. But watching the relationship between racism between classism and racism over there, that was interesting because I would go to sort of the south side of Manchester, the south side of Chicago version of Manchester, England. So Manchester, England is an industrial city, kind of reminded me of a combination of Pittsburgh and Gary, kind of working class town. And I would go to what would be considered sort of like the South Side where the black folks lived, and there were blacks and whites living together. And it was more a class delineation than there was a racial delineation. Now, I haven't been back over there since then, and I'm dying to go back over and take my kids. But as I'm listening to what's going on with the Royals and Meghan Markle and all of that kind of stuff, it reminded me of the time when I lived there, and I thought to myself 30 years ago that, wow, it's really interesting to see poor black people and poor white people all in the same situation, and the rich folks who live in the suburbs are all over here.
Yeah.
Now, there weren't as many people of color who were in the middle class,
Yeah.
but that's because it was the middle class,
Yeah.
you know, and as you went up the class structure, it lightened out. And so that was an experience that also informed me about my own struggles being black and growing up in America.
Yeah, yeah. Which is, I mean, it's so eye-opening with travel in general, right? No matter where you go, seeing the world from another set of eyes, you're never the same person again.
No, you aren't. And, you know, my mom used to tell me that we shouldn't think of ourselves as better than other people, because you shouldn't, right? And I don't feel that as much now. It's really something with social media. It makes you, it's like everybody's trying to show why they're better than other people now. It's like the complete opposite.
More likes, more followers, all of that. Absolutely.
It's absolutely incredible. But she also she said it for a different reason. And it's kind of I believe this too. I was afforded a lot of these really neat experiences because my parents were they had the foresight to sort of let us try things.
Yeah.
And put us in the position to succeed. Man, I grew up with a bunch of guys who could have done the same thing.
Yeah.
Could absolutely, you know, trade bonds at a Wall Street firm like I did, coach basketball, play sports, but they didn't have sort of the experience that I have. They didn't have the exposure. And I really felt that from traveling around the world.
Yeah.
And seeing all these capable people from different cultures. You know, it's all about opportunity. And that's why education is so important for the young people out there. It gives you the ability to have options.
Yes. And you clearly had options, you know, the NBA, England, and now you come back to Wall Street. You went from having no money to making a lot more money than probably most people around you.
Right.
Living a seemingly really good material life as well.
Right.
And, you know, you got into what life dictates at a time. Mm-hmm. So what was that transition like for you in those years?
Yeah, well, you know, this was back when, you know, even pro basketball players weren't making the kind of money they were making now. And I absolutely lucked into the financial business, you know, and I was that guy when I came back. Once I realized I wasn't going to be a professional basketball player, I thought, where could I go and make the most money? I can use this Princeton degree. It's going to be good for something. I'm going to go make some money.
Money was the goal, huh?
That was the goal because I grew up poor.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with people who haven't had things for trying to strive to get to where they want to get to. At least that's what I will say, because that's how I was feeling. Yeah. And so I was fortunate enough to get a job as a stockbroker to start out, and that's sort of kind of retail compared to wholesale investment banking. And once I got in, and I was wondering, how do you get over there to that side? And everybody over here had an MBA, so I went back to school, got my MBA, and I started working on Wall Street. But I will tell you, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story here, because it's pertinent to how I ended up back into coaching. When I was playing overseas in Europe, the coach that I had in England was a big Pete Carrill fan, and Pete Carrill was the coach at Princeton when I played there. And he asked me when I was over there, Tom Becker was his name, he said, do you mind showing me some of that Princeton stuff and showing the team? And I showed him a couple things that we would do on offense. And I, on my way back from England, stopped back through Princeton, see my sister who was there, see some friends, and see Coach Carrill. And I go into Coach Carrill's office and I'm like, Coach, I know what I want to do. I want to be a coach. Yeah. And then he flies off the handle. You don't want to be a bleeping coach. Now, he wasn't saying that because he was malicious or didn't think I should be. Sure. He said, here you are, a black kid from the south side of Chicago with a Princeton degree, and all you want to do is be around this basketball. Go get a job. I'll tell you when you should be coaching. And he was dead serious. He was dead serious. And I, the dutiful player, was like, oh, geez, maybe I shouldn't be a coach.
Yeah.
But so I went and got a job and ended up working in finance. And like I said, I went back and got my MBA and ended up in the sales and trading side and investment banking and eventually corporate finance and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up in the finance industry.
And you were checking off all these boxes, right? You know, master's degree, check.
Yep.
Next thing is settling down in life.
Yeah. So after I got the job,
Yeah.
I got the car, I got the, whatever I want now.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, time to get married.
Yeah.
And then I ended up getting married like a lot of guys do. And this is one of these things that my mom was the person who counseled me more on women than my dad. My dad counseled me on the streets.
Yeah.
My mom was counseling me on how to deal with these women out here. And I made the key, and I won't say it's a mistake, but I made a judgment call of what guys typically do. Guys end up marrying who they're with when they're ready to get married.
At that time, yeah.
And I haven't done any empirical data, but I'm talking about like my friends, and you end up being lucky or not lucky.
Yeah.
Right? If guys have this order that they think things should go in, and I was going in systematic order. All right, play ball, done with that. Get a job, got that. Make some money, got that. Get all the things you want, live a single life, did that. Now it's time to get married and start a family. And I ended up marrying the person who I was with when I thought I should get married. And that lasted for a little while.
Right.
And then it hit the skids. And at that point, I was like, I wouldn't say a crisis mode, but I had to rethink all the things that I had to think. My system is off kilter here.
So, at the same time, you became a father for the first time as well, right? So one more big milestone. Now you're not just someone's son or husband. Now you're responsible for another human being.
Yeah.
Scary?
Not only was it scary, I had heard my mom say, they don't teach you how to do this.
Yeah.
Well, they don't.
Yeah.
They don't. And, and my mom had home ec, right? Or home economics for people who never heard of that probably. But that was like a health class that you learned how to be a mom.
Yeah.
Or do mom things. They didn't have that at Mount Carmel High School or at Princeton University.
Yeah.
So, and I was thinking, man, here it is, early 90s. I got to raise this boy to be a man. And the situation wasn't much different than it was when I was younger.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of to show him some of the things that my parents had to show me to sort of keep him out of harm's way.
Yeah. And obviously, and I remember the only time in my life I've spontaneously cried is when my son was born, right? Mm-hmm. And it's that overwhelming emotion, and that you can't fail. Like you want to do everything you want to do at the time to take care of them, to protect them, often at your own expense. And something your sister told your now wife, Kelly, is that if I ever ask you how things are going, don't tell me everything is fine.
Yeah.
And you're the guy who always said that during those years.
And I will tell you, when my first marriage was sort of ending, I didn't tell anybody because I always hoped that it would work out. And I felt like if it worked out and I had told everybody all these things, I would have forgiven her sooner than they would have, and they
Sure.
may not never have.
Yeah.
And I just learned that from having friends who had their heart broken by girls and then went back to them. I'm still mad at the girl, right? Even though he's happy.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to subject my ex-wife to that.
Yeah.
So I was acting like everything was fine. And my sister, when she found out that things weren't going fine, she was madder at me than she was at anybody else.
Yeah.
And yes, then she told, when she met Kelly, she said, the only thing I want to know is if things aren't fine, I want to know they're not fine.
Yeah.
And needless to say, things have been fine.
Yeah,
So
of course.
I wasn't, I don't have to worry about it. But as men, and it might not even be just men, it might be firstborn. I know some women do this. It's just a personality trait, but it's particularly men keep their issues inside.
Yeah.
We are not natural you partakers in the mental health aspect of our lives until we absolutely have to.
Yeah.
And that is something in our socialization that I see changing nowadays because people are more aware and there's more information out there. But growing up, my dad sort of kept the issues inside. We didn't know he was sick when he was sick before he died.
Yeah.
I have done the same thing. My male friends who have gone through divorces and tough things in life have done the same thing. So it was learned behavior for me to sort of start to partake in what's out there to help men, particularly with sort of mental health issues or family issues or things when things aren't going smoothly.
Yeah, and it's not you, or it's not even here, Craig. This is universal, where it's seen like a sign of weakness, right?
Yeah.
Men don't cry, don't show emotion, be strong. First, there's that internal pressure to have to be strong. But in one of our other talks with this event, we have Dr. Lakitha Poole, who is the sports psychologist with LSU. Mm-hmm. And she talks about changing the narrative in terms of men, and especially men of color, asking for mental health support.
Right. And see, that's just not that hasn't been our lane, right? And although looks like I don't go to the barbershop anymore, that used to be the place.
That's true.
Where we didn't know it, but that was our form of mental health. Some people have the church. Some people have their boys in the locker room after a pickup basketball game or a softball league. But we didn't sort of go to the professionals for that kind of triage. I'm here to tell you, and I know we're going to talk about it later, but you can't be afraid to reach out for help. Yeah. And it's not just physical help, you need mental help.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And you had friends that were pouring into you, and you had your group of people that were sort of helping you get through that as you were making a really big transition.
Yep.
And you went from banking to basketball again.
Right. Yeah. My dearest friends all thought I was having a nervous breakdown, because here I am, and like I said, I was in an industry making a lot of money for a young guy, but the whole time that I was in the banking industry, I wasn't all in, because it's really a zero-sum game, right? If you're winning, somebody's losing. And that just wasn't my makeup at the time. And deep down, I still was going back to that coaching. And so my plan, Nile, at the time was, I was looking at my bonus checks, and I'm thinking, man, if I can do this until I'm 45, 50 years old, then I'll have enough to pay for the house and the kids' college, and then I can retire, and I'm gonna teach 7th grade and coach high school basketball. That was the plan.
Yeah.
And that plan was abruptly halted when my former college assistant coach, Bill Carmody, who was the head coach at Princeton, got the head coaching job at Northwestern in
Yeah.
Chicago. And by then I was working in Chicago. And he called me up out of the blue, and I thought he was calling to say he was moving to town. And I always would talk to him about kids in Chicago who
Sure.
he should recruit, and he'd come out and we'd go to games, and I knew all the, I mean, Chicago's like a small town in a big city.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Every coach, every player, I either knew their coach or their dad or their brother, or, you know, it was just like a small town, so
Yeah.
I would help him. Well, he was calling me up to offer me an assistant coaching job
Wow.
at a Division I college. And I was stunned, so stunned that when he called me, I was on the trading floor. I was like, all right, let me call you back. And I went outside and I jumped in a taxi, and I told the taxi, just drive around. I got to make a phone call. Because, you know, you don't have any office,
Yeah,
no
yeah,
privacy.
yeah.
So he calls and tells me about it. And so by now, my first marriage is, I'm going through a divorce now. But I have 2 kids. And I'm trying to figure out if I can take this job, because in my mind now, I'm going from making what I'm making to making a tenth of what I'm making as an assistant coach. And so I'm in my mind, I'm trying to figure out if I can do it. And I'm like, yeah, I can do this, but I want to talk to some people. So
Sure.
I talked to the 2 people who I would go to for advice, my mom and my sister.
Yeah.
And so they both barrels, they handed to me like, what is there to think about? You should be doing what you like doing. And if dad was alive and he told you to do it, you'd have done it by now. You won't want to listen to us because we're women, and that's my sister. That was my sister. She was just going all in. But she really hit me with the, you should do it because you love doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was never about the money for me, because after you sort of buy a couple of the things you want, you realize this is just stuff.
It's tough.
And so I was more worried about my kids, who were 8 and 4 at the time. So I had the bright idea of putting it in their hands. So, and I'm trying to be this woke dad even back then. And so I get them in a room and I say, well, guys, I think dad's going to get another job. And they looked at me. Now they kind of understand that their mom and dad are splitting up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And initially they thought I had to move. And I was like, nope, don't have to move. I'd still be here. We'd still do all the stuff we do. I can coach your little league and do all this stuff. And I said to them, dad's going to be a coach. And I was waiting to hear their response. Because if they, and I'm worried about the wrong things. I'm worried about the house, big house you have, the nice car, the nice vacations. They're going to miss all of this. That was what was going through my mind. Stuff. Yeah. Right? 8 and 4. 8 and 4, and I'm worried about stuff.
Yeah.
Well, they put me in my place, because and so I say that, and my 8-year-old says, and who's a boy, says, calmly, I mean, he paused, and he said, does this mean that your office is a gym? And I said,
how awesome is that?
I mean,
how awesome is that?
It was so neat, because it also made me feel like a chump.
Yeah.
Because there's just kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't care.
Yeah.
They just want you to be around.
Yeah.
And I said, well, my office won't be in the gym. It won't be a gym, but it'll be next to the gym. And he said, cool. And my daughter, right after he was done, she said, do they have a pool there? And I said, yes, they do. And they were like, oh, sounds good. Yeah. And that was when that's when I made the transition. And it was a great move for me.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. That's how I end up in this seat.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, how little sometimes it takes for such big decisions to happen, and with kids especially, right? It's the whole thing of you get the gift in the box, and they play with the wrapping paper and the bubbles, right?
Yes.
And it's we ascribe all this materialistic thing because we think they want it.
Right.
They don't want that stuff.
They don't.
Yeah.
And we talked about being empathetic. It's hard when you're an adult to be empathetic to a kid on something that big, because you're blinded by you're blinded by parental concern.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was so worried about them, and they weren't worried about anything other than what kids worry about.
Yeah. 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 And you, of course, successfully transitioned, but you had two very different coaching experiences, from Brown and Ivy League to Oregon State and basketball. What were those experiences like?
Well, they were both great experiences, and but just different institutions.
Sure.
And what I will say is, you look at it, as I said earlier, both sets of players want to be in the NBA if they could.
Yep.
They want to be professional players.
Yeah.
The people at Brown, the young men at Brown, were there. They picked Brown because of the education.
Sure.
And the guys at Oregon State picked Oregon State because they wanted to play at Oregon State, or they wanted to play in the Pac-12, or it was more of a non-academic decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for both places, what I learned is I needed to manage they were just like my 8 and 4-year-old. They were just kids.
Yeah.
Who were trying to get through this adventure, and hopefully, and I'm hoping they come out on the other side as better people.
Sure. What were some stark differences, if you would, between those two that you observed?
It's interesting when kids get recruited at high level, and high level meaning bigger conferences, they expect more materialistically.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that's a difference. That's a difference in recruiting, and a difference in the players. But it's just an individual. You have to recruit each individual to the situation that you're in.
Sure.
And what I tried not to do was try and recruit somebody who should have been at one school to my school.
Yeah.
I tried to be honest that way, because it's hard enough recruiting kids who want to be getting kids who want to be in the situation you have, because there's other people who have similar situations.
Yeah.
But they're really, in the players, other than the talent level, there's not much difference.
Yeah.
And I maintain, if you had enough time with both sets of players, they could probably develop into about the same skill level.
Sure.
Which is sort of somewhere between mid-major college to high-major college, but not professional. That's where most kids end up, right? Most kids don't play. Most players don't play professional basketball.
Sure. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right? They don't play professionally. But it's just the level of development. But when it comes down to it, they're kids. They're individuals.
Yeah. And that last piece is critical, because I feel like the moment you said Brown, in my mind, I'm slotting them in that box, right? Here's the guy or gal in general. That's what they're going to do or not do.
Right.
And if you're here for basketball, and we're starting to compartmentalize them a lot.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that I learned in coaching.
Yeah.
That I didn't bring. A lot of the stuff that I brought to coaching, I brought from parenting.
Yeah.
One of the things that I learned from my players and learned from the coaching experience is to not compartmentalize my players.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to do.
It is.
It's easy to do because, especially at a place like Brown or a place like Oregon State, if you're in one of the elite universities and you can recruit the sort of the top 50 or 60 guys,
sure,
and they all want to come, it's an easy group. But when you have to cast a wide net and you're in sort of the top the top 1,000 kids out there, you're looking at, you tend to compartmentalize them in these easy boxes.
Yeah.
But what you realize when you get them on your campus and you get them in your lives, each one of them is an individual, and they have to be coached individually.
Yeah.
And it's more so today than even when I was coaching, 7-8 years ago. So that was one of the things that I learned from my players. And while we're on the topic, another thing that I learned was this mental health aspect of how important mental health is in the lives of the kids you bring into your program.
Yeah.
And that, along with an empathetic view of the situations they're coming from at the same time, those kind of go hand in hand. You really have to spend some quality time with them individually to get the most out of them.
Yeah. And you know this better than I do, but when you have all these men's and women's teams in the dance, right? They're all great teams in general. Sometimes the edge is not the physical on the court, it's the mental, right? What's happening at home, what's happening outside the court, and addressing them or you helping them feel safe to be in that space, to be themselves, could often be that little extra that takes that ordinary to the extraordinary.
Yeah. And I've always felt like coaching or managing, being in a position where you're in a mentoring or you're a leadership position, but particularly coaching, you're trying to get people to do something that they couldn't necessarily do on their own.
Yeah. The Jedi mind trick, the mom again.
Jedi mind. You have to sort of Jedi them, and conning isn't the right word because kids can sniff out a con game.
Yeah.
But you have to help them get to a point that they couldn't get to, but in the end, they got to feel like you're in it with them.
Yeah.
But it was mostly their doing.
Yeah.
That's when you can get teams to win championships and win a lot of games and be successful.
Yes.
And really, to sum it up, coaches have to make, as keep using the term kids, but young adults be the best people they can be.
Yeah. There's a quote we have in our house as well for the kids, and it says, "Believe in your children, and they'll believe in themselves."
Ooh, that's good.
And what you said is so much of reminiscent of just that. Is you have to show the kids that you believe in them at times when they may have self-doubts.
Yes. Yeah. And that is, and you can't do that compartmentalizing kids. You have to get to know them individually.
Yeah.
And you talk about a safe space. I have always felt that the teams that I've been on were places where I could feel really safe with a group of people.
Sure.
And we as coaches have to continue to make our game a safe space for these young people who we're being whose parents are turning them over to us for,
Absolutely.
for significant growth.
Yeah. Now, when you were coaching, though, one or two people you knew were slightly famous, and a little known. What was that pressure like? Because I'm sure every action of yours was under a scanner in some ways.
Yeah, it is, and it will be from now on. That's the interesting thing about, when you have family members who are famous. And I only know this now. I didn't have this growing up. We weren't a political family.
Right.
When my sister met Barack, he was talking about being in politics.
Right.
But nobody could have ever thought he was going to be president of the United States.
Sure.
No way. Right. And nobody would have ever thought my sister would have been the first lady.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, no one would have thought the two of them would have lasted. The way my sister went through guys, it was like, this dude's not going to last. But he lasted, right? And he ends up being president. As a result.
Yeah.
And I was already coaching. So that's public enough.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then when you walk into a building and people immediately know your politics, that is another level.
Yeah.
That is another level. But it's, it didn't phase the work because if you're being authentic, people know who you are anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, people probably could have guessed my politics.
Sure.
But it's interesting, in all my leadership positions, including this position, people assume that my motivation is political just because I'm related to the former president of the United States.
Right.
That is aggravating, but it's part of life. The other thing is, when I was coaching, and I was told this by a former AD at Colorado, who or associate AD, who I happened to be on a plane with. Now, Colorado's in our league, and she asked me the exact same question, but she asked me for a different reason. She said, I don't know how you can do it, because I watched you at our place in Colorado when we played, and every time the refs made a call, the entire the entire arena turned to see what your reaction was going to be. And I'm like, yeah, well, that just comes with the territory. But my training has come from being sort of the tall black guy in the room. People always watching what you're doing. And not
always for the right reasons.
Not for the right reasons, which is what my parents sort of trained me on. So I was sort of preparing for this a long time ago, thanks to them. So while it can be annoying at times, you know, I was already used to it by being a coach. And what I didn't want it to do is to have an adverse effect on the team or the players. So I always went out of my way to sort of make sure that they were in a safe space. Because when we traveled, people would come up to us and want to take pictures, and they want to do that anyway. But they did it a lot more once once my sister and Barack got in the White House.
I mean, you know, all credit to you. You've been successful as a coach and done a lot of great things, but I'm sure you'll be the first to admit this doesn't happen without a really supportive partner behind the scenes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You can't have a job as a coach by yourself. I don't know how single guys do it, because my wife Kelly was just as much involved in the recruiting and in the sort of the family feel that our team had. You know, we had them over for dinner regularly. She brought our kids around them because we thought it was important for them to see how a typical nuclear family works, and how I work with my kids, how I'm just as hard on them as I am on you guys, maybe even harder. And you cannot do a team, let alone a regular life, if you don't have a supportive partner. And it's really important when you have a job that puts you out in front too, because there are times when you have to take the bullets for folks, and there has to be somebody at home that sort of puts the Band-Aids on those wounds. And my wife was a former college athlete too. She played softball and understands team, understands sacrifice, compromise, discipline. So we make a good partnership. And I have to imagine, I mean, with my wife and I too, we talked about living here. We have so many things we take for granted that as you travel around the world, you realize people don't have that. So instilling even that basic perspective for us and our kids, 8 and 3, is something we're conscious of. Your level is a whole different world where you're going to a Thanksgiving or a Christmas party at the White House, right? Your vacations are different places. How did you and Kelly keep that, try to preserve normalcy, if you would, with your kids at that time? You know, our older kids, they're old enough to sort of understand what they're going through. Our younger kids, for a while there, they only knew Barack as he was the only president. and so there were ways we tried to make it normal.
Yeah.
Right? Like when we would take our team to Washington, D.C., we'd have Thanksgiving, we'd play a game, have Thanksgiving at the White House and make it seem like it's normal. But that's not normal.
That's not normal,
it's
man.
Not normal.
Yeah.
It's not normal. And we just tried to counsel the younger kids on this isn't normal, but they didn't understand. So much so that my 11-year-old, so Barack has been out how many years now? 5 years?
Yeah. Boy,
it seems like it was just yesterday.
Yeah.
Although in some ways it seems like it was 20 years ago. But he, when he was leaving office, we were trying to explain to them, all this stuff this is going to be the last hurrah. We were trying to go to as many things and embrace it and enjoy it while we could. And so 5 years ago, our 11-year-old would have been 6. So he said, which one of our uncles is going to be president next? That's how he thought. He thought this was like a family.
Yeah.
He thought this was like the crown, right? And we were like, "Whoa, hold up, we gotta that's not how this works." and we had talked about voting and all that kind of stuff, but yeah. So we just said we'll explain it to them later. When they get older and can understand.
Yeah.
And they're really getting to a point where it's not such a big deal. For a while there, they'd be going to school and we would say, listen, if they ask what you did over the holiday, just say you had dinner with the family. You don't have to say you had it at the White House. You don't have to say you went to Camp David and you were on Air Force One. And it's like, don't be those kids. We were trying to.
That's good.
Yeah.
Again, easier said than done.
Easier said than done.
Very much so. But yeah. Well, good. I mean, obviously, you're now in a leadership role with the NABC, and in a different kind of influence. Beyond just the students, to now you're influencing the influencers, right? The coaches itself.
Yeah.
And you've come in at a time when, especially post George Floyd last year. You've seen this as well with the Derek Chauvin trial happening right now too. There is a whole different level of conversation around race reconciliation, and you have a committee on that.
Yeah.
And you're talking a lot more in your core values about that.
Right.
So where does the NABC go from here?
The NABC is it's been a wonderful organization, and I've had the pleasure to be a part of it as a coach, and Jim Haney, who was my predecessor and the former executive director, did a terrific job. And once I got hired, I inherited. It was right after the George Floyd incident, and as a result of the George Floyd incident, the NABC board and the executive director came up with a committee on racial reconciliation.
Yeah.
And that committee I inherited, and they had started kind of these processes, and they were absolutely terrific. Standardized tests, they were fighting to get that repealed based on the fact that it was biased.
Sure.
There was the McClendon Leadership Initiative, which was started by a few of the coaches who, and one of the issues in the lack of African Americans in the space of coaching, but as well as administration, is a pipeline issue.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
And what these coaches came up with was a great idea on how to get more people in the pipeline. So what our coaches have done is they're sponsoring positions in athletic departments for young African Americans to sort of be exposed to the industry and hopefully have a chance to be hired by some of these places and sort of start filling the pipeline.
Yeah.
Because you hear about plenty of industries where there are where all the black folks are the entertainers or
Right,
the
right,
sort
right.
of
Yeah.
the players,
Yeah.
but they're not in the front
Leadership,
office
right.
or the leadership roles or the decision-making
Yeah.
roles. And our coaches, and it was a diverse group of coaches. So these weren't just black coaches.
Right.
These were black and white coaches and Hispanic coaches who came up with this idea. And so we've got that initiative that's going.
Yeah.
We're also trying to get, we're lobbying politicians on getting African American studies be a required curriculum in both high schools and colleges.
Sure.
And then we did a huge voter registration and education initiative that was national this year.
That's great.
That was done by a group of assistant coaches. So, you know, we are trying to do as much as we can to combat these different issues of racial injustice, and hoping some of them stick.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we know that
Or
not
they will.
all of them, but some of them stick. But we've got a platform where we have
Yes.
coaches who are well known, and you know, people hear about the Division I coaches, but our Division II, Division III, NAIA, junior college coaches, high school coaches have all been doing their part, and I think there's more to come.
Yes.
I think there's more to come, and my job is to sort of help lead that, but to also be out in front for the coaches.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I can add some value is being out and telling our stories and telling what we're trying to do, and letting our coaches be able to spend more time developing our student athletes.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, as a former coach yourself, to current and potential coaches, is there anything you look back on your coaching career and say, I wish this were different? Any regrets?
So, you know, I wish that, so, you know, we have different levels. So we have the Division I guys that everybody sees, but, you know, we have a lot of Division II, Division III coaches who are real teachers.
Yeah.
And there is part of our game where the coaching has turned into a profession, where we've lost the teaching part, and the goal is winning, as opposed to developing
at all cost.
Yeah. And if I hearken back to when coaches were teaching, because that's what made me want to get into it, because I had some good coaches and some good teachers, and who helped me get to where I am today. And just, it feels like we could help a lot more people that way. But I get it. It's the business aspect of it is needed, and it's there, and I understand that. But, you know, when I look back and I think about how this could be a better, how we could do better at what we're doing, it's sort of, it would be nice if the guys who graduate the most players get as much shine as the guys who win the most games.
Yeah.
I understand that, but that's part of my job too, is to remind people that we've got thousands of coaches who are out there coaching kids who are graduating and going on to be professionals in something other than their sport.
Which the majority of the athletes will be anyways.
Yes.
Anyways, right?
Yes.
So I know, you know, as we sort of wrap this up too, Craig, one of the big pieces you've done is add another core value.
Yes.
Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, so the NABC has always had 4 core values: advocacy, education, service, and leadership.
Yep.
And, you know, we had the bright idea, you know, sort of thinking around the office that we have 4 core values and we're in a sport with 5 players. It would be kind of cool to have a 5th core value. And it was easy to come up with a 5th one based on what we're dealing with now.
Yeah.
And our board unanimously approved us adding the 5th core value of inclusion, which is so timely.
Absolutely.
And it just, you know, it runs the gamut from equity to socioeconomic, racial.
Yep.
Just there's so many ways that our coaches can really push that core value, and we can push it as an association. We were really excited, and this year, at our virtual convention, we're going to have our award series. We'll have a Guardian of the Game award for inclusion. So stay tuned.
Well, and that is the future to come, right? As you look at your kids and mine as well, from everything from gender, race, equity, inclusion, all these different facets.
And
it's
able-bodied and non-disabled.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, it embodies everything.
Yes, and it's not checking a box anymore, right? I think that's where, Dr. Lapchick's one of the speakers too, talking about many of the things you said with building the pipeline, and hopefully again ensuring 20 years from now we're not having more of these similar conversations. Craig, with all that you're doing as well with the NABC and then beyond, and I'm not saying you're old, but if you think legacy, right, how would you want people to look at your impact or remember you and think of you?
Well, I want people to feel like we've added value to the organization and to coaches, and that really that people look at coaches in a positive light again. Coaches have taken a little bit of a negative hit here in the recent past, and I as I mentioned earlier, I think coaches are a big part of all of our lives because you don't necessarily have to be on a team to get coached. But I'm just hoping that this organization, we put it on a path where it can evolve with the times and not get stuck in one place.
And from your life journey, if there's one thing you want people to take away, what would that one thing be?
Everyone should absolutely try doing something they love for a living. So when they decide not to do it and do something for money, they'll know what they're missing.
Amen to that. So, Craig, before we end, I have a little rapid fire thing for you. I'm going to go through a bunch of quick questions.
All right.
No time to think.
Okay.
Just answer real quick. All right.
Just first thing.
Boom, boom, boom.
Mind. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Favorite food?
Pizza.
Guilty pleasure?
It's either potato chips or ice cream, so I'll say potato chips.
Okay. Childhood nickname?
No nickname. One syllable.
A nickname now?
Nope. One syllable name like Craig. No nicknames.
First crush?
I've got two answers for that. First, my legit first crush was 6th grade, a girl who will remain nameless.
Okay.
But my first real crush came in 6th grade. But my fantasy crush then was Diane Carroll. I don't know if you know who that is. She's a famous actress who was in a TV show called Julia.
Okay.
And she was a single mom who was a nurse, and everybody I know had a crush on her back then.
That's good.
I mean, I don't even I can't 1968.
Okay.
Yes. So, but when you said crush, I was thinking celebrity, but then real at the same time.
So it reminds me a little bit like I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, and everybody watched Baywatch.
Yes.
And Pamela Anderson was seemingly that.
Yeah, this was not a Pamela Anderson. Yeah, everybody liked Pamela Anderson at my age, too.
Favorite athlete growing up?
Oh, another two-part question. Baseball, Ernie Banks. Football, Gale Sayers.
Okay. What are you watching on Netflix now?
Formula One, Survive and Drive.
My brother-in-law just messaged me about that. How is it?
It's terrific.
Yeah?
Yeah, but see, you and I are Formula One fans.
Yeah.
Most people aren't Formula One fans.
Yeah.
Especially here in Indy, they're IndyCar fans.
Yeah.
But
true.
I got into Formula One when I lived in England playing basketball.
I was wondering because, again, I wouldn't peg you as an F1 fan.
No, most people wouldn't. But you also wouldn't peg me as my first job well, you know when you're in second grade and your teacher asks you to stand up and tell everybody what you want to be? She asked me and I said, I want to be a race car driver. And she publicly shamed me in front of the whole class. Not because she thought she was being nice because she was saying, you're too smart to be a race car driver. But what she didn't realize is those jobs turned out to be, you have to be pretty technical as well as being able to operate the car.
Yeah.
You have to know how to read and read the panels and they're practically engineers.
Yeah. Well, you're too tall for that anyways, though.
As it turned out, my legs ended up being too long. I couldn't fit in a race car anyway.
You and your sister, push-up contest. Who wins?
My sister.
Yeah. You and your brother-in-law, one-on-one basketball. Who wins?
Me.
Okay. One habit that your wife, Kelly, despises about you.
Boy. I'd have to say, you know when you're the last person to drink the wine out of a wine bottle? She hates it when I don't recycle the bottle. She hates it. And I feel nostalgic about the bottle, so I don't really want to throw it away. But then again, you can't save bottles. So I end up putting it on the counter, and then she ends up putting it in the recycling. She hates that.
My wife always adjusts the dishwasher loading stuff after I load them. So that's always there for me.
See, I do more dishwashing than the dishwasher does. I'm old school that way.
There you go.
Yeah.
Prediction, men's and women's Final Four champions.
Women, UConn. Men, boy, Gonzaga, Baylor, Gonzaga, Baylor, Gonzaga, Baylor, Gonzaga.
I think that's the only part of my bracket I'm going to get right. So that's pretty much it.
I picked Florida State, so I've been out for a while.
You're done.
Yeah.
Final one, racially just future is?
Short answer, when everyone, and I want to emphasize everyone, realizes that what people of color have put up with for the last 400 plus years has had an exponentially negative effect. And then that way, when they realize that, then we'll start to come up with better solutions. But I don't think everybody realizes how much of a disadvantage folks are because of what happened 400 years ago.
Yeah.
That's a longer answer to your rapid fire, but that question came out of that's for more discussion.
There is, and I think you now in a biracial, in a mixed race marriage with biracial kids, that's the future we're raising the next generation in, and so we don't want to be in a place where we're saying I don't see color as much as I see it. I value it for what it is.
That's right.
And I'm going to ensure that is not a barrier to opportunities.
That's exactly right. And I think, I absolutely agree with what you say, and I'll amplify it with this. I feel very confident about the future because of the young people in this world.
Yes.
I think that for the first time, my friends who are, white businessmen who are in positions of power on boards and running companies, for the first time, they're asking the right questions, and it's because of their children. And so I feel hopeful.
I want to say it is refreshing to be in front of a live person again.
Right.
Even as we're socially distanced. But there is hope. And I want to thank you and, of course, the NCAA and everyone else that's helped put this on as well. Greg, thank you very much.
Thanks, Nilay.